I'll never forget the moment the report flashed across my screen, each word searing into my mind with a grim clarity. Earth Atmosphere Assessment. Toxicity level lethal by galactic standards. Recommend quarantine of inhabitants. I blinked, and then blinked again, as if I could somehow shake the impossible assessment out of focus and see it for what it was: a glitch, a bad joke, a mistake in translation. But the lines held steady. Earth's air was deadly, categorized under the highest level of atmospheric toxicity. Our standards for planetary assessments were stringent, and nothing about Earth's profile should have put it on a list with high-risk environments. Yet here it was, flashing on my screen, a mix of Technicolor alerts screaming danger over every line. The initial shock clung to me like static, making my brain stutter through half-formed questions. How was this possible? How could a planet where nearly 9 billion humans breathed every day be labeled toxic? Why hadn't they all died? As an intergalactic researcher specializing in habitable ecosystems, I had spent my career cataloging life in extreme conditions. I'd seen my share of dangerous worlds, cataloged planets where acid rained from the sky and where gravity crushed anything that tried to stand. But Earth was a backwater world, noted for its biodiversity, yes, but hardly dangerous. And humans? Well, humans weren't exactly known for extreme biological adaptations. I'd met a handful of them during cross-species research conferences. They were as unremarkable physically as their planets seemed to be. Nothing in their biology hinted at a resilience that could overcome this. The message on the report flickered to another line, the letters in deep red: immediate action required. Behind me, the Galactic Health Council's secure communications channel buzzed to life. I turned to see the meeting notification appear on my screen, followed by a rapid series of links as the others joined. I tapped into the network and found myself staring into the grim faces of the galaxy's top scientists and diplomats. Dozens of eyes stared back at me, all carrying the same dread, the same fear. To them, this was an unexpected crisis, a crack in the structure of our understanding of what makes a world habitable. In the midst of the silence, Dr. Carva, a lead scientist from the planet Zeller, cleared his throat. His image crackled into clarity, and his voice carried the weight of every other council member's fear. As you all know, the atmosphere assessment on Earth has returned disturbing findings. According to galactic standards, Earth's oxygen levels exceed lethal thresholds by more than 300%. For most oxygen-intolerant species, even brief exposure would result in respiratory failure. Murmurs buzzed across the call as other members processed the figures. For some species, even a fraction of Earth's air could shut down their respiratory systems. And yet, here were the humans, alive and thriving. It was this paradox that drew me in. But humans, I argued, cutting through the rising chatter, seem not only to survive but thrive in this atmosphere. We've been in contact with them for decades, and they've shown no signs of respiratory distress in our records. I could feel the skepticism radiating from several of my colleagues, but I pressed on, undeterred. What if their biology is uniquely adapted to handle these levels? If we're considering something as drastic as quarantine, we need to understand their adaptation better. The council fell silent. Finally, a diplomat from the Anaran cluster spoke up, his voice filled with authority. Adaptation or not, Earth's humans are now a classified biohazard. If they're capable of breathing a gas that would be lethal to any other species, they present a serious health risk. We cannot ignore the possibility of contagion if we're dealing with an unknown biological factor. Their words struck me like a challenge. I knew these people, their expertise, their logic, but also their tendency to fall back on safe answers. They wanted to classify Earth under a blanket policy, put a quarantine label on it, and move on. But that didn't sit right with me, not with questions lingering in every corner of my mind. If I may, I interjected, we're at risk of drawing conclusions from incomplete data. Instead of theorizing, why not collect hard evidence? Send an observer to study humans on Earth, to understand how they've adapted. I could feel my heartbeat quicken at my own words, but I steadied myself. Send me. The entire council seemed to stare at me. A researcher volunteering to go to a classified biohazard zone was unheard of. The council president's eyes narrowed as he looked at me through the holoscreen, his expression calculating. "You're proposing we send an emissary to a planet classified as toxic for research?" "For answers," I replied firmly. "If humans possess adaptations that allow them to thrive in lethal conditions, we need to understand how. This is unprecedented, and it deserves more than a blanket solution." The president exchanged glances with his advisors. The silence stretched until I felt like I could almost hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, with a slow nod, he finally spoke. "Very well. Your determination is commendable. But understand this, if you proceed, it will be at your own risk. We cannot intervene if anything goes wrong." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of trepidation and exhilaration. This was the assignment of a lifetime, a mission that would push the boundaries of known science and perhaps reveal something remarkable about our understanding of biology itself. My instincts told me that something unprecedented lay hidden in Earth's poisonous atmosphere. The meeting closed with a sense of finality. As I exited the virtual conference room, I felt the weight of my decision settle over me. My career, my credibility, my life all hinged on uncovering the truth about Earth and its toxic air. The days leading up to my departure passed in a blur. Each hour was filled with the grim necessity of preparation, securing clearance, ensuring my equipment could withstand Earth's conditions, and training myself for the reality of breathing its toxic atmosphere. The council had outfitted my suit with a specialized filter designed to reduce oxygen intake by 90%, simulating the familiar levels found on most standard habitable planets. They warned me, however, that the filter had a limit. It would keep me safe for no more than a few hours at a time. Still, the risks didn't deter me. I couldn't shake the strange, insistent pull I felt toward this mission. Earth was already a known world. It was supposed to be ordinary, if a bit primitive, a backwater planet with a dominant species that had only recently discovered faster than light travel. And yet, everything about this mission was unlike any I'd ever undertaken. The transport ship was small, designed for stealth and single-passenger missions. I sat alone in the cockpit, watching as my homeworld faded into a distant pinprick against the vast backdrop of stars. I keyed in the coordinates, initiating the jump sequence. Space blurred, then folded around me, and I felt the familiar pull of faster-than-light travel as the stars streaked past, leaving a deep silence that felt oddly comforting. In those quiet moments, I tried to focus on the facts. Earth's atmosphere contained approximately 21% oxygen, over 3 times the amount typically considered safe. Galactic health regulations deemed anything above 7% hazardous. The risk of cellular degradation, respiratory collapse, and even sudden combustion was documented in nearly every atmospheric study. For the Council, Earth's air was little more than a hostile soup of volatile compounds, something to be avoided, or at best, studied from afar. But the humans had survived, thrived, even. By all standards, they should have perished under the weight of their own environment. And yet here they were, a species that had built sprawling cities, that had filled the planet with technology and culture, all under conditions that would kill nearly any other life form in the galaxy. I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect and curiosity for them. The transport ship's systems beeped, snapping me out of my thoughts. I was entering Earth's atmosphere, and the external pressure surged, buffeting the ship as it adjusted to the thicker, oxygen-rich air. I took a slow breath, feeling the filtered air hiss through my helmet, a subtle reminder of what lay beyond the walls of my suit. I was moments away from touching down in a world classified as lethal. I had to be prepared for anything. The ship's descent took me over a vast patchwork of landscapes, forests, rivers, mountains, and cities sprawling with lights. I hadn't fully understood the scale of human civilization until I saw it with my own eyes. There was something relentless about the way they spread across the land, building, adapting, thriving against all odds. It was strange, seeing a world so hostile, yet so vibrant. Finally, the landing protocols initiated, and I guided the ship down to a secluded patch of forest. The council had approved a landing in a remote area to avoid drawing attention, and I hoped it would give me enough cover to observe humans without interference. The ship touched down with a soft shudder, and I went through my final checks. Systems were operational, oxygen filters secure, emergency retrieval protocols set. This was it. With a steadying breath, I opened the hatch and took my first step onto Earth. The forest greeted me in a burst of sound and scent. The air was thick, laced with scents of damp earth and plant life. I activated my helmet's filters, feeling the subtle hum as it adjusted to the oxygen levels. Still, I could feel the density of the atmosphere pressing against my skin, almost like a weight, a constant reminder of the toxicity that surrounded me. I moved carefully, testing each step, acclimating to the unfamiliar terrain. The forest floor was soft, blanketed with fallen leaves that crunched beneath my boots. I was struck by the sharpness of the air, the way each breath filled my lungs with an almost overwhelming clarity. It was exhilarating and unsettling at once. My first objective was simple: observe and gather data. I knew that I had limited time before my filter would need recalibrating, so I began by documenting everything around me. Plants and wildlife thrived here, and their forms were as varied as any I'd seen on other planets. Birds darted through the branches above, and small creatures rustled in the underbrush, moving with a quickness and alertness that hinted at a world filled with both beauty and danger. I was engrossed in cataloging the environment when I noticed movement in the distance, a figure, human, walking along a dirt path through the trees. They were alone, carrying something over their shoulder, seemingly lost in thought. I quickly activated my cloaking field, the technology rendering me invisible to human eyes, and watched from a distance. The human moved with an ease that spoke of familiarity with the landscape, stepping over roots and rocks without hesitation. I noted their breathing, the steady rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, entirely unguarded in this supposedly toxic atmosphere. There was nothing remarkable about their appearance, nothing that indicated they were capable of extraordinary feats of survival. And yet, here they were, defying every assumption the council had made. As they walked past, I noticed a strange calm about them, an unhurried acceptance of their surroundings. I had to remind myself that this was their world, that for them, this oxygen-saturated air was as natural as the filtered atmosphere I was accustomed to. I wanted to approach, to ask them how they felt, what it was like to live in an environment that by all galactic measures should be unlivable. But I knew that was impossible. My mission was to observe, to gather data, and to remain unnoticed. Direct contact was strictly forbidden. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a revelation, that there was something here, just out of reach, that I had to understand. I felt a strange kinship with the humans, a sense of admiration for their ability to carve out a life in conditions that should have defeated them. I stayed in the forest for hours, moving from one point to another, cataloging plant species, observing animals, listening to the symphony of sounds that filled the air. Each moment added to my growing sense of awe. This world was dangerous, yes, but it was also alive, pulsing with a resilience that defied all logic. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest, I began to make my way back to the ship. My suit's oxygen filter was nearing its limit, and I knew I would need to recalibrate before my next venture out. But as I stepped back into the ship, one thought burned in my mind. I was only just beginning to understand Earth. Back on the ship, I reviewed the data from my initial outing. The atmospheric scans confirmed everything the Council had feared. Earth's air had oxygen levels far above what any interstellar health code would consider safe. The reading numbers flashed on my console, a stark reminder of the risks I faced each time I stepped outside. But alongside the risk, something else burned in my mind, an inexplicable sense of wonder. Earth was not just alive, it was fierce, thriving, vibrant. Each species I had cataloged adapted uniquely, somehow suited to breathe in the air that surrounded them. And at the center of it all were humans. They didn't just survive here, they seemed to be woven into the fabric of this wild, strange world. If I wanted answers, I would have to observe them more closely, perhaps even get near enough to truly study their behavior. The next morning, I ventured out again, careful to adjust my oxygen filter settings and check my cloaking field. My plan was to get close to a human settlement and observe them in a more social environment. If I could understand their communal behaviors, I might get closer to solving the puzzle of how they thrived in this supposedly toxic world. After a brief hike through the forest, I reached the edge of a small town. Human structures dotted the landscape, their designs practical, but not entirely utilitarian. There was an artistry to their homes and buildings, as if they cared not only about functionality, but about beauty, too. It struck me as curious and oddly appealing. I approached the outskirts cautiously, blending into the tree line while keeping a clear view of the village. Humans moved about with purpose, some carrying bags or pushing wheeled carts, while others gathered around various structures, exchanging words and laughter. Even from a distance, I could sense the energy among them. They were loud, expressive, and seemed to communicate as much with their movements and gestures as they did with their voices. Among them, children raced down the paths, laughing and calling out in high, lilting tones. Their speed and lack of caution startled me at first, but no one else seemed alarmed. Adults watched over them, but with a relaxed ease, as if accustomed to the risks these small humans took. I watched as a child stumbled, skinned a knee, and sprang up with only a moment's hesitation. A nearby adult rushed over, murmuring something in a soothing tone, and the child went back to running, undeterred. I marveled at the resilience on display, the casual acceptance of risk, even in their youngest. But more striking than their physical endurance was the way they interacted with one another. Human expressions, I noticed, were astonishingly varied. Faces lit up in joy, softened in sympathy, hardened in anger. Emotions played out with remarkable intensity, unguarded and unhidden. I could feel the depth of their connections, a bond that extended beyond mere survival. Here was a species that valued more than just existence. After some time, I shifted to a position closer to the town center, hoping for a better view of their interactions. As I settled in, something new caught my attention, a smell, unfamiliar and intriguing, drifting from an open building nearby. I inched closer, careful to remain undetectable, and peered inside. The building was filled with humans seated at tables, sharing meals. Steam rose from dishes, and the air was thick with scents I couldn't quite identify: savory, sweet, and something that made my mouth water in a way I hadn't expected. They were eating in groups, talking and laughing, their faces relaxed. The variety of colors, shapes, and textures on their plates fascinated me. I'd never seen such a display of food on my homeworld. Sustenance was a practical affair, consumed alone, often quickly. But here, humans turned it into a ritual, a communal experience. It was both functional and celebratory. Suddenly, my attention was drawn to a young woman sitting by a window, her gaze distant as she sipped from a cup. She seemed lost in thought, isolated from the laughter around her. I wondered what could occupy her mind so intensely. Humans appeared to be social creatures, yet here was one who seemed content in her solitude, finding comfort in her thoughts. I watched her, intrigued, until another figure approached and sat down across from her. She looked up, startled, but then broke into a smile. They spoke for a moment, and her expression shifted from surprise to warmth. As I observed, I found myself captivated by the subtle exchange, the way they communicated without words, a nod, a shared glance, a quick smile. There was a grace to it, a language of unspoken understanding. The more I watched, the more questions bubbled in my mind. How did they survive here? Was it something in their physiology, or was it more than that, some mental or emotional resilience that allowed them to thrive? These questions grew louder, and with them, an urge to get even closer. But I couldn't risk detection, and my oxygen filter signaled that it was nearing its recalibration threshold. With one last look, I backed away from the village and returned to the forest, slipping into the cover of trees as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Back on my ship, I compiled my observations, noting each detail. Humans had a connection to their world that I hadn't anticipated, a bond that seemed to go beyond survival. They thrived not because they fought the environment, but because they embraced it, even celebrated it. Earth was harsh, unforgiving, but they had built lives filled with community, laughter, and resilience. I tried to make sense of my findings, cross-referencing their behavior with other known species. But no other race, no other society, fit the profile. Human resilience was not purely physical, I realized. It was something more profound, something tied to their emotions, their relationships, and their undeniable bond with each other and their world. The night passed with little sleep. My mind churned with theories, each one more improbable than the last. Had the Council missed something fundamental? Were we overlooking a unique form of adaptation, one that didn't rely on biology alone? One thing was certain: I would have to go back. The answers I sought were somewhere out there, among the humans, woven into the fabric of their daily lives. I was just beginning to understand them, to see the depth of what this world held. And I knew that the closer I got, the more questions would arise. As I prepared for my next visit, a thrill of anticipation ran through me. I wasn't just documenting Earth's environment anymore. I was beginning to see the humans for what they truly were: complex, resilient, and, perhaps, something far more extraordinary than I'd ever imagined. Days passed in a steady rhythm. Each morning, I prepared for the mission with a set focus: blend in, observe, document, retreat. But my objectives had started to shift. I wasn't only interested in the atmospheric data anymore. Instead, I found myself drawn to the people, their stories, and their peculiar resilience to Earth's so-called toxic conditions. Each day revealed something new, something that defied the Council's warnings and filled my research logs with questions. I ventured out earlier than usual, aiming to explore a different area of the village. It was a bustling market square, filled with vendors, families, and groups of friends exchanging greetings and sharing news. Cloaked in invisibility, I moved through the crowd, absorbing the scene with wide-eyed fascination. Here, humans interacted with an ease and warmth that felt almost foreign. They touched each other in friendly gestures, clasping shoulders, shaking hands, hugging. Emotions were on full display: joy, exasperation, curiosity, even love. This overt display of emotion was something I hadn't seen replicated in any other species I'd observed across the galaxy. Most alien societies had a certain restraint, a tendency to conceal feelings beneath layers of propriety. But humans were vibrant, unfiltered, open with one another in ways that seemed both risky and, perhaps, essential to their survival. I paused near a small group of elders, seated around a table, laughing as they shared stories. Their voices were steady, worn by age, yet filled with a depth of experience and connection. One of them, a gray-haired man with a cane, was recounting an event from what he called the old days. The others listened closely, their expressions moving between nostalgia, laughter, and quiet reverence. I noted it all, fascinated by the ease with which they shared their lives with each other. It wasn't long before I realized something. This openness, this unguarded display of emotion, wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. Humans didn't merely exist alongside one another, they leaned into each other, relying on bonds of community that made their world seem less hostile, less toxic. Here was a resilience that no atmospheric filter could replicate. I left the elders and drifted toward another area of the market, where younger humans were trading food items and supplies. Here, the pace was brisker, with people exchanging quick words and small currency tokens. They moved with an efficiency that hinted at a lifetime of practice. I watched, amazed, as people haggled, joked, and negotiated, adapting to their environment with a flexibility that seemed nearly instinctual. As I observed, one figure stood out, a woman carrying a bag filled with plants and herbs, her expression focused and determined. She moved from stall to stall with a quiet confidence, checking each item with a discerning eye before making her selections. There was something different about her, something that made me feel she understood Earth's natural elements better than most. I followed her at a distance, making careful notes on her behavior. When she reached the edge of the market, she paused, glancing around with an alertness that set her apart from the others. I froze, hoping my cloaking field was secure. But to my relief, she moved on, walking toward a building with a small sign out front. Inside, I caught a glimpse of shelves lined with jars, plants hanging from the ceiling, and various tools strewn across a counter. The place seemed to be a mix of shop and laboratory. Curiosity overpowered caution. I stepped closer, peering through a window to get a better view of her workspace. The woman was busy grinding some kind of root, the scent drifting through the air and prickling at my senses even through my filter. I watched as she combined it with other ingredients, moving with a practiced efficiency. It dawned on me she was a healer. In her world, surrounded by dangers, she had taken it upon herself to understand Earth's plants and minerals, extracting their properties to aid those around her. And humans, it seemed, trusted her knowledge implicitly, relying on her skill to mitigate the risks of their environment. Here was adaptation at its finest, not through genetic mutation, but through ingenuity, through shared knowledge, through generations of learning and preserving the wisdom of their world. The council would have dismissed her as an anomaly, an outlier. But as I watched her, I felt the weight of her significance. Humans didn't survive on Earth because they were immune to its dangers. They survived because they adapted, because they found ways to use their environment to their advantage. They had cultivated a symbiosis with their world, relying not on biology alone, but on shared knowledge, community, and an endless drive to understand and master the unknown. I stayed for hours, captivated by the healer's work. She moved with care, her hands deft and confident as she prepared different concoctions. I realized that this was what I'd been missing, a piece of the answer that had eluded the council. Earth was dangerous, yes, but humans didn't fear it. They embraced it, meeting its challenges head-on with a creativity and resilience that defied all logic. Eventually, my oxygen filter signaled it was time to retreat, and I reluctantly made my way back to the ship. Inside, I pored over my findings, reviewing every detail I had observed. The healer, the market, the elders, each scene reinforced the truth that was forming in my mind. Earth's toxicity, as the council called it, was real. But for humans, it wasn't a barrier, it was a challenge, one that they met with ingenuity and community. Their bond to their world wasn't biological, it was cultural, emotional, rooted in their shared history and their willingness to support each other. But as I compiled my report, a sense of urgency crept over me. I knew I would have to return to the council eventually, but I wasn't ready to leave. There was more here, more that I had to understand. If I could just get closer, spend more time among them, perhaps I could uncover the full truth. I shut down my console, feeling the weight of my discoveries. Earth's danger was undeniable, yet the humans had built lives of resilience and beauty here, thriving in a place that should have destroyed them. They didn't merely survive, they embraced life with a tenacity that I hadn't encountered in any other species. As I prepared for rest, a final thought echoed in my mind, one that felt both thrilling and terrifying. What if the council had been wrong all along? What if, instead of condemning Earth's conditions, we should be learning from the humans who thrived here? Their world was dangerous, but they had shown that danger could be faced, adapted to, even welcomed. I drifted into sleep, a single question burning in my mind. Could the answer to survival in hostile environments be something as simple and as complex as courage? The next morning, I awoke with a resolve that hadn't been there the night before. My observations so far had opened a flood of new questions. I couldn't just stand by and observe from the sidelines anymore. To truly understand the humans' resilience, to capture the elusive why behind their ability to thrive on this so-called toxic planet, I needed more than numbers and observations. I needed experience. With my cloaking field active and my oxygen filter recalibrated, I set off toward the town at a brisk pace. This time, my focus was clear. I wouldn't just watch, I would attempt to interact. My research had shifted from detached curiosity to something more personal, almost a compulsion. There was a magnetic pull that drew me toward these people, as if their resilience could unlock a deeper truth I hadn't yet uncovered. By the time I reached the village, the morning market was in full swing. The air buzzed with sounds of haggling, laughter, and children's playful shrieks. I lingered near the edges of the crowd, keeping my movements slow and deliberate to avoid detection. My goal today was simple: find a way to get closer, to experience their world on a level I hadn't dared before. A particular group caught my attention, a trio of people unloading crates from a large cart. They were young, close to what humans called their prime, and their movements were swift but unhurried. One of them, a man with a sturdy build and sun-browned skin, adjusted his load and began speaking to his companions, the words coming out in a casual, easy rhythm. They laughed, the sound rolling out like a shared melody, and continued working without pause. A part of me yearned to join them, to be part of the easy camaraderie they shared. In my own world, interactions were formal, structured. There was little room for unguarded laughter or warmth, as each encounter carried a sense of duty and decorum. Watching these humans, I felt an ache I hadn't anticipated, a strange longing for the freedom they seemed to embody. As I stood there, lost in thought, a sudden commotion broke out near one of the stalls. A young child barely old enough to walk steadily had toppled over, landing with a small cry. Before I could react, the child's mother scooped him up, soothing him with soft words as he blinked away tears. I watched, fascinated, as the mother cradled her child, her touch tender and reassuring. I made a note: human empathy as a defense mechanism, shared resilience through emotional support. Before I could complete the thought, the mother glanced up, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, her gaze landed directly on me. I froze, my cloaking field humming softly, my breath catching. She couldn't see me, could she? Her eyes passed over me, lingering for an instant longer than I'd have liked, but then she returned her attention to her child. I exhaled, relief mingling with an odd sense of vulnerability. For all my precautions, the human's presence seemed to cut through my defenses, drawing me out from behind my research. I felt exposed, as if they could sense my curiosity, my unspoken desire to connect. For the remainder of the morning, I stayed close, watching them interact, making mental notes, allowing myself to be immersed in the pulse of their world. As the day wore on, I grew bolder, moving closer, my footsteps light, barely audible beneath the sounds of human activity. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon an opportunity I hadn't expected. A young man, carrying an armful of fruits, tripped over an uneven patch of ground and dropped his load. The fruits scattered across the path, rolling in every direction. Before I could stop myself, I reached down to help, my instincts overpowering my sense of caution. As I extended my hand, I hesitated, realizing that if I became visible, the consequences could be disastrous. But before I could pull back, the young man glanced my way, blinking as if he sensed something. I retracted my hand, blending back into the background, watching as he gathered the fruits with a puzzled expression. As he moved on, I felt a surge of frustration. My desire to connect, to bridge the gap between observer and participant, was growing stronger by the day. It was no longer enough to study them from afar. I wanted to experience life as they did, to understand their resilience from within. By nightfall, I returned to my ship, restless and unsatisfied. The interactions I had witnessed left me with an undeniable sense of wonder and envy. Their lives, though filled with challenges, had a richness, a depth that my own existence lacked. Each day brought new trials, yet they faced them with unwavering determination, anchored by their connections to each other and to their world. I spent hours that evening poring over my findings, my console glowing with data. I analyzed every detail, searching for patterns, for a way to quantify what I had witnessed. But the numbers fell short, unable to capture the essence of what made these people so uniquely suited to their environment. Just as I was preparing to rest, a signal alert flashed on my console, startling me from my thoughts. A council transmission. I hesitated, my heart pounding, before reluctantly activating the communication channel. The familiar, formal voice of my superior filled the room. "Field Officer 7X8, report on your progress," came the command, sharp and unyielding. I took a steadying breath. "Counselor, my observations are ongoing. I have gathered data on the atmospheric conditions and initial findings on human adaptation." However, I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. My research suggests that humanity's survival on Earth may involve more than biological adaptation. There appears to be a strong social and emotional resilience at play in adaptation through community and shared experience. There was a long pause, and I braced myself, knowing how unconventional my statement must have sounded. Finally, the counselor spoke, his tone laced with impatience. "Field officer, our interest lies in quantifiable data, not philosophical speculation. Your task is to assess the risks of Earth's environment and evaluate whether humans present a viable model for adaptation to toxic atmospheres. Conjecture about their social structures is irrelevant. Stay focused on the task assigned to you." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a cold silence in its wake. I sat there, feeling the weight of the council's expectations bearing down on me. They wanted numbers, measurements, charts that would fit neatly into their rigid definitions. But the answers I sought were messier, embedded in the humanity I had come to observe. For a moment, doubt crept into my mind. Was I straying too far from my mission? Would my findings hold any value if the council dismissed them outright? But even as the question swirled, I knew that I couldn't go back to a simple analysis of data points. The truth of Earth's resilience lay in the people, in their relationships, their courage, and their adaptability in the face of adversity. I made a decision then, one that felt both exhilarating and daunting. I would return to the village the next day, but not just as an observer. I would take a risk, find a way to engage, to bridge the gap, and experience the human world from within. The council might never understand, but I was no longer simply gathering data. I was seeking something more, something that couldn't be measured on a console or recorded in a report. I was on the verge of discovering what it meant to be human, to thrive in a world that defied all logic and caution. As I drifted into sleep, my mind raced with possibilities, with the promise of connection and understanding. Tomorrow, I would return to the village, not just as a scientist, but as a participant in the extraordinary resilience of humanity. And for the first time, I felt a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with my mission and everything to do with the people I had come to admire. The next morning, I felt a strange energy, anticipation mixed with nervousness. My objectives had shifted entirely. Today, I wouldn't just observe, I would attempt to interact. I adjusted my cloaking field to a lower intensity, leaving a faint outline that would allow me to be seen in peripheral vision, like a shadow or a breeze, barely noticeable but present. With my oxygen filter set for an extended duration, I headed back into the village. The marketplace was lively as always, and I made my way toward the healer's shop I'd visited before. I lingered by the door, listening as she spoke to an elder woman who had come for advice on a persistent cough. The healer's tone was gentle but confident, each instruction precise. When the elder left, I slipped into the shop, taking in the scents of herbs, the faint burn of dried roots and leaves mixing in the air. The healer, sensing movement, turned her head in my direction. For a moment, her eyes locked onto the outline I presented. She blinked, puzzled, and I held my breath, wondering if I'd overstepped my boundaries. But instead of recoiling, she took a cautious step forward. "Is someone there?" she asked, her voice steady, curiosity evident. I didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, tense but strangely calm. After a moment, she smiled, a gentle, knowing expression. "You don't have to hide," she said softly. "Sometimes, the unknown just needs a little light to make sense." Her words stirred something within me. Perhaps, after all, these people were more perceptive than I'd understood. Emboldened, I shifted further into her field of vision, my outline becoming clearer. She gasped, but it was a sound of awe, not fear. Slowly, I deactivated the cloaking field, and for the first time, I stood visible before a human. She regarded me with wide eyes, her face softening with understanding rather than shock. "You're not from here, are you?" I shook my head, finally speaking. "No, but I've come to understand you, to learn." Her gaze held mine. "Then you're in the right place. We're all here to understand each other, one way or another." I spent hours with her that day, speaking in halting exchanges about our worlds, our differences, our fears. She told me about Earth's natural remedies, about her training in plant lore passed down through generations. She described how they survived their environment, not by battling it, but by learning its secrets and working with it. For the first time, I understood the full extent of their resilience. Humans were adaptive not because they were immune to danger, but because they had cultivated a relationship with it, learning to live with the elements instead of against them. By the time I left her shop, I was filled with insights I could barely contain. It wasn't just their physical resilience that allowed humans to survive, it was their deep-rooted connection to each other and their world. I returned to my ship, my heart racing with the urge to transmit these revelations back to the Council, to make them understand what I'd discovered. The following day, my communicator crackled to life with an urgent message from the Council. They'd detected fluctuations in my cloaking field and had grown suspicious. I was ordered to return immediately for debriefing and to submit all data. As the message ended, dread coiled in my chest. If I returned to the Council with only raw data, they would interpret it as they always did, through numbers, devoid of humanity. They wouldn't understand that the real discovery lay beyond the quantifiable. I hesitated, torn between duty and conviction, knowing that the truth I had uncovered needed to be shared, but fearing the repercussions of doing so. As I considered my options, the healer's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes, the unknown just needs a little light to make sense. Humans weren't just subjects for study, they were teachers, exemplars of resilience and unity. I decided, then, that I would defy the Council's directive. I would remain on Earth, gather more findings, and bring them the complete truth, no matter the cost. I spent the following weeks immersed in the village, observing and participating as best I could. I worked alongside the healer, learned the nuances of human relationships, and saw firsthand how they navigated life's challenges with courage and adaptability. I experienced their world as a participant, not merely an observer, and every day I was astonished by their strength and complexity. One evening, as I sat outside the healer's shop, watching the sunset paint the sky, my communicator lit up with a red alert. A Council enforcement team was approaching Earth, their ship already in orbit, preparing for extraction. Panic flooded through me as I realized what it meant. They were coming to retrieve me, and with them, they'd bring the threat of exposure to humanity's way of life. I rushed to the healer, barely able to explain, my words coming in hurried fragments. She listened, her face calm but resolute, and then placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Whatever they do," she said, "remember that understanding can't be taken away. You've seen what it is to live here, to breathe this poison, and find life within it. Don't let fear erase what you know." I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion, and fled back to my ship. As I prepared for the Council's arrival, I quickly compiled my notes, transmitting the findings to our distant outpost with a single, concise message: "Humanity thrives through resilience and connection. Our classifications are wrong." When the Council arrived, their emissaries demanded a full report. I spoke to them not in the sterile terms of data, but in the language of experience, of immersion. I told them about human connections, the interdependence that allowed them to flourish even under conditions deemed hostile. I told them about the healer, about the mother with her child, about the community that made Earth a place of life, not danger. My words, however, were met with stony faces and skepticism. "You've grown attached," one of the emissaries said, a note of censure in his tone. "You've let their simplicity cloud your objectivity." I held my ground. Their simplicity is strength, something that cannot be dismissed by calculations. They survive not through immunity, but through adaptation and unity. They teach us that resilience can come in forms we don't yet understand. The Council fell silent, their expressions unreadable. Then, after a long pause, they spoke in the formal tone that meant they had already decided. "Your findings will be reviewed," the emissary stated. "For now, you are to return with us. Further observation will be conducted by other agents under stricter protocols." I felt a hollow ache as they led me back to the ship, knowing that my findings would likely be buried, misunderstood, or ignored. Yet, as Earth receded in the viewscreen, a quiet resolve settled over me. I had come to understand the truth about humanity, a truth that had changed me irrevocably. Back in my own world, I returned to my work, restricted to secure facilities, my findings sealed and inaccessible. The Council had classified humanity's resilience as an anomaly, an outlier to be studied and controlled, rather than embraced. Yet, despite their dismissiveness, I held on to my experience, determined to honor what I had learned. Word of my research, however, spread among those curious about alien worlds. Colleagues whispered about Earth's inhabitants and the mysterious resilience that defied all classifications. I spoke to those who would listen, sharing my insights with quiet conviction, hoping to plant seeds of understanding. Over time, others took interest, and a quiet shift began among our scholars and thinkers. The question that haunted me had begun to echo within the halls of our world. Could we, too, find strength in connection, in embracing the dangers we had always feared? My findings may never reach the Council's approval, but I know now that truth isn't confined to their sanctions. Humanity had shown me that resilience could come in unexpected forms, that survival wasn't just about adaptation, but about the courage to face the unknown with an open heart. Earth's toxic atmosphere had taught me more than any sterile, safe world ever could. Years passed, and though I would never return to Earth, the memory of its people remained alive in me, a quiet, enduring flame. The humans I had come to know and admire might never realize the impact they had made, but in their unyielding spirit, they had changed my world forever.